Spoiler alert, if you don't want me to spoil the end of the book War of the Worlds to you and you don't already know, then don't watch this video. And for those of you who saw the movie that came out recently, the book and the movie are very different, so just keep that in mind. For those of you that don't know, War of the Worlds is a book written in 1899 by H.G. Wells chronicling what if aliens invaded in the year that the book was written. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to use the original 1899 War of the Worlds as a basis for this instead of the recent Tom Cruise movie. At the end of War of the Worlds, when our unnamed hero has helped drive off the Martian invasion, the book ends and lights go out, the description stops. That's where I come in. The point of this alternate history is to see what would happen if a Martian invasion would have happened in 1899. How would the world have continued after that? And what would the rest of history be like? For this timeline to work, we'd have to assume that Mars would be a livable planet that would have life on it, and not the cold, frozen planet that we have in our timeline with no life. We can assume that after the end of the book, that after the Martians had caught human diseases, they'd bring them back to Mars, and so giant plagues would ravage the Martian population. But the Martians, having studied humans for many years, would know the signs of vaccination, and so the Martians would likely implement vaccination, but there are so many diseases within humans, they would still likely wipe out 90% of their populations, and only a few would survive the diseases. But as the Martians use cloning instead of sexual reproduction, that means that they could rebuild their numbers very quickly, but it would still likely take them 50 years to fully rebuild their numbers and civilization to pre-plague amounts, as they had to retrain everyone and rebuild the things that had been lost. This would give humanity a breathing space of around 50 years before the Martians would attack again, and so the humans likely use this time to rebuild. Europe would likely take the brunt of the attack, as Europe was the most powerful region in the world in this time period, and so the aliens would send the most troops there. Also, European countries are fairly compact and small. For example, if you invade France and you conquer Paris, all the other cities are much smaller than Paris, and so you've basically taken the heart out of the country. Austro-Hungary would likely collapse under the stress of the alien invasion, as Austro-Hungary was filled with minorities who hated the government and would rebel if the government was wiped out. And with the alien destruction of Vienna, that would mean that all the minorities would rebel and the empire would fall apart. The countries of Western Europe, wanting to rebuild, being afraid of American and Russian invasions, and being afraid of another alien invasion, would likely form together into an early European Union in the early 20th century. Of the countries of the world, America and Russia would likely weather the storm the best, as in those countries, power isn't as centralized. For example, in America, if the aliens were to wipe out New York City and Washington, the American government would still have Philadelphia, Chicago, New Orleans, and Kansas City. But in countries like France, if Paris is wiped out, you only have a few much weaker cities to work with. With Western Europe almost destroyed, that would mean that their colonial empires would likely become independent. From an alien's point of view, Japan wouldn't seem important enough to send a giant invasion force against, and so Japan wouldn't take the brunt of the invasion and would be stronger than the other powers. And so the Japanese would likely swoop down and take out French Indochina and the Dutch East Indies when the Dutch and the French would be too weak to protect them. As the powers of Europe would be too busy working together to rebuild instead of killing each other, World War I would never have happened in this timeline. A major side effect of World War I never happening would be that the Ottoman Empire would never have collapsed. World War I had deeply scarred the Western world. That such a bloody war could happen jarred people's personalities, and people lost faith in that technology would always bring us forward and have us advance. And World War I made the human race much more pessimistic. So, if World War I never happened, the human race would be much more optimistic. I'll give a few examples to make that last point make more sense to show that I wasn't lying at that point. For example, words such as honor became mocked after World War I, and same with the words such as progress, and Artwork after World War I became much more nihilistic in style. World War I had deeply scarred Western civilization, and so people began to look for answers. And this came in the form of communism and fascism. And in a world without World War I, communism and fascism would never have become big. Without the hatred about losing World War I that caused World War II to happen, and with huge amounts of the world's population being killed in the alien wars, World War II would never have happened because there wouldn't have been a rise of fascism or the population pressures necessary. Human technology would be hundreds of years ahead of where it was in our timeline. For example, the humans would steal space travel from the Martians, as well as cloning, and walker technology would arrive at roughly the same time as tech technology would be invented, and so we'd have some strange tank walker hybrids, similarly to those if you've ever played Dust, in the Dust board game. Meanwhile, in Mars, the Martians would steal vaccines from the humans, which, as we mentioned earlier, as well as artillery, which they seem to have lacked in H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. The Martians, having recovered in the 40s, would likely re-strike and try to take out Earth again in the 40s. Due to the human invention of the nuclear bomb, the humans would likely win this war, though, and drive the Martians off with nukes. The humans would want to colonize the moon because they'd be worried that the Martians would want to take control of the moon and use it as an aircraft base to attack Earth due to the moon's proximity to the Earth. And so the humans would build colonies in the moon to take control of it before the Martians could. There'd likely be a few wars over the moon, mainly small scale, but the Martians would likely back off and let the humans colonize the moon until they could invent nuclear weapons to rival the humans. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this timeline, please comment or subscribe. What if Altist? Thank you for watching.